I get in some pretty good discussions on chapter 12 in the book of Revelation. Most people think that it's an event that's going to take place entirely in the future. I disagree. And so I'd like to show why I disagree and point out that a lot of the events in chapter 12 have already taken place. If we look at the book of Luke, chapter 10, verse 18, we see a comment that Jesus made, and he said, "I saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven." Now this was written sometime long before the book of Revelation. And so Jesus is telling us that he saw this event take place in heaven before he came. Okay, so Jesus told us about the fall of Satan and when it took place. So we know it took place before he came. Now let's look at the book of Revelation. In Revelation chapter 12, verses 7, 8, and 9 all tell us about the war that broke out in heaven. And it specifically says, in heaven. This is between Michael and his angels and Satan and his angels, where Satan didn't prevail. And then Satan was cast out, and he was cast to earth. This is the battle that Jesus was talking about. So what this tells us is the chapter 12, 7, 8, and 9, all this took place before Jesus came to earth, and this starts us a timeline that we can refer to and use to decipher the book, the 12th chapter in this book. Let's look at a timetable that represents a genealogy of mankind. Here we see that Noah was born 1,056 years since the creation of Adam, and he died 2006 years. It's important to understand that 2006 years. Abraham was born before that 2006 year period, 1947 years since creation of man, and he died 2122. If you subtract the 2006, take the 1947 subtract 2006, you get 59 years that they were alive at the same time. Okay, so now let's go back and look at Abraham in the book of Genesis. Okay, Genesis 17:7 points out that God has established a covenant between himself and between Abraham. And this covenant is for an everlasting covenant. It means it's something that's going to go on forever. Okay, we know that people die, and so this covenant in order for it to last forever, it has to have a promise in it of some kind. Okay, you can't make a promise of a covenant and then not have the means to make it happen, because we know that everybody has died, and so Jesus came and he is the means of providing that everlasting covenant. Now let's take a look at Revelation 12:1 and see the birth and the beginnings of this plan of providing for this covenant, the salvation plan. It starts off with a great sign appearing in heaven and a woman. Okay, and she's clothed with the sun, and the moon was under her feet, and on her head 12 stars. Okay, stars typically in the book of Revelation means angel. It isn't stars like we see in the heavens. It means she has 12 angels. We also can tell that she's a pretty good sized woman. The moon under her feet. That's a slight comparison of God, who's the heavens are my throne and the earth is my footstool. we know that God literally isn't resting his feet on the earth, but that's a comparison of size. And so this woman has a great size to her, but she's not a physical woman. She's in heaven, so that would be a spiritual being. What it is then is she is with child, and she cries out in labor. Okay, then what happens is another sign appears, and that is Satan. And I'm going to scroll this down a little bit. And so it describes Satan right there. And then when it's time for her to give birth, Satan is like, you know what? I'm going to take and I'm going to destroy this plan of salvation. Because this is what the woman represents, is a plan of salvation. And so the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to give birth to devour her child as soon as it was born. Now this is going on in heaven, okay? This is not here on earth. It's not talking about when Jesus was born. And she bore a male child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. This is upsetting to Satan because Satan is the ruler of the world. And he doesn't like it when somebody else is going to come along and take over take over everything that he has done. So the woman then flees into the wilderness for 1,260 days. At that time, this is still a heavenly time. This is not earthly time. And then a war breaks out in heaven.
This is the part that I just got through explaining, and this is the fall of Satan. So let's move on down. After Satan is cast down to earth, okay, we're still in heaven. Satan is gone, and he's still talking about what he's seen in heaven. And he says, I heard with a loud voice saying in heaven, now salvation and strength and the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ have come. This means that God is cleaning up heaven along with cleaning up earth. And now the power is coming and there's no interference. As we go on and see, as he says, rejoice, ye heavens, and you who dwell in them, but woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea. Of course, that's because Satan has been cast down. He's cast down to us, and he's pretty angry. So he's going to make war against everyone. After he's here, he still persecutes the woman who gave birth to the male child. Now, this is a spiritual woman. It's a plan of salvation, and he's persecuting it. But the woman, given 2 wings of an eagle, that she can fly off to the wilderness, and there she is nourished for a times and half a time from the presence of the serpent. So he cannot get to her, and she is nourished. Now this time and half a time is can be, a lot of people have interpreted this as the 3.5 year time frame. I don't interpret it that, and it has to do with this plan of salvation starting back with Abraham. We know that Jesus is Lord of the Sabbath, and we know that God rested on the Sabbath. And so from the time of the last Sabbath day until the next Sabbath day where Jesus is Lord will be 7,000 years. If you take time times and half a time and divide it into that 7,000 years, it comes out exactly with the day of judgment being the last day, which is the last day of all of the things that are supposed to happen. So what happens next is it says here that Satan spewed water out of his mouth like a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away by the flood. Well, he can't do this because he's confined to the parameters of earth. And that's what it means by 12:16. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon had spewed out. Satan is really angry. Of course, 17 ends with 17, verse 17. The dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went out to make war with her offspring, who keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. Her offspring would be a spiritual offspring, and that is that we learn about Christ and about God through spirit. And Satan wants his spirit to be over people and not the Spirit of God. And so this woman's offspring is a spiritual offspring and a spiritual knowledge and presence of God. Well, that's some of the basics of the foundation of what I have and how I interpret chapter 12 in the book of Revelation. I think it dates back to a long period of time before Jesus, back to the time of Noah and Abraham. And of course it will extend on till this whole battle with Satan is all over with, which comes long after the millennium. So I hope it's helpful, and hope you got something from it.